to get it done, and mistakes are made.
That's right. You got the Twitter handle right.
So here we go again. This is Tea with Tom with Brandon Elrod, and I goofed on his name. I'll have to fix that later, but it's been a technically challenging evening.
Yes, it
First,
has.
could not be heard, and then could not be seen, and then it was private, and well, you know how it is. Google is just doing a hell of a job.
Yeah, it's fitting for our discussion tonight. If we're talking about
Yes.
the
Yes.
difficulties.
So Brandon, I wanted him on to talk about how difficult it is to have a conversation online, because we've been having a conversation for I forgot to even check out, but it's been like a couple of years, I think. And it's been quite a
It
while.
started sometime last year.
Yeah. Talking about where morality comes from, and talk about whether or not Jesus existed, and basically your basic theological discussions. And a lot is lost in translation of trying to have a conversation online, because you're trying to write down your thoughts, and as you're writing them down, you're losing them. And or at least in my case, I start thinking about something else as I'm writing, so my thoughts kind of get segued unceremoniously, and what other people get is not quite as clear as it is to me, because I've finished one thought and gone on to the next one before I finish writing down the first thought. Never a good way of getting things done.
Yeah,
That's it.
it's
I want to
been
make sure that it's public this time.
yeah.
Let's see. Please be public. Loading. I got too much going on. And it is slow. Well, conversation's open. That's good.
Yeah.
Anywho, so hopefully somebody, let's see. Back. So anyhow, trying to have conversations online is difficult. I'm not sure if there's any way to make it more streamlined, other than patience, because I fall into the bad habit of wanting to very quickly get my idea down, and I rush. Typically because I got a lot to say, and writing takes a while. Where having an actual face-to-face conversation, or even on the phone via video or telephone, you can see where my thoughts, well, not see where my thoughts are going, but you can better understand when I've broken my thought process and then jumped onto another thought. Where when you're writing it down,
Yeah.
that is lost. And you can also interrupt, whereas when you're writing it down, you're trying to respond to 5 or 6 different things, and you're just going on and on and on. And the person also needs to respond to 5 or 6 things, and each thing prompts a couple responses, and all of a sudden you're trying to respond to 30 things, and just it's near impossible, because you have to spend so much time copying what the other person has said, so that you know what the hell you're responding to. And we started a conversation. I think I had posted something somewhere, and I don't know if you had responded to that initial post, or how our interaction actually started.
Yeah, I
But
can't really
it started
remember
off with
exactly.
ethics, or not ethics, morality, because I fall into the thought that morality is based on empathy. Empathy being a product of evolution, where churches teach morality as a product of God. And I don't know that I ever fully was able to convey how I thought morality is actually just religion's way of not absconding, but taking credit for empathy. Because empathy gives us, why don't we steal? Why don't we kill? Why don't we hurt people? It's because of empathy. It's because of our ability to understand that other people are affected by our actions. And it's something that needs to be learned, but it's also something that's already within us. We teach children empathy, but only because I think because there's so much distraction. I think most kids, if left to their own devices, they will figure out if somebody takes their stuff, they don't like that. Um, and that's the evolution, or not the evolution, but the development of ego and id and whatnot. Once they realize that having their stuff taken away from them makes them feel bad, and they understand if they take somebody else's things away from them, it will make them feel bad. And it's, a lot of people like to say, morality is, God's stamp on our hearts, which only works if you think there's a God, which of course I don't. And having these conversations is tricky. I don't know how to improve them, or if there even is a way to improve them other than having direct conversations like this, which is why I wanted to start this Tea with Tom category of videos, was to have some of these conversations that I've been having online in person and see if we can't better communicate the ideas that we've been trying to convey online semi-successfully.
Yeah.
How often do you have conversations with people online about such deep philosophical subjects?
First off, can you hear me? Am I coming through all right? All right.
Yes.
That's not all that often. You're one of the main people in kind of the history of how I've done things online, who I've most of my interactions have been face to face with friends and over the phone, typically, and most writing that I've done on philosophical, deeper things has been in an academic setting. So going back and forth in papers and that sort of thing. So online, it can be very difficult just in general to try to deal with the different mediums that you have, whether it's social media or whatever. It's just not always the most conducive, especially Twitter. If you're looking at, especially the at mentions and going back and forth with only having 240 characters. And so usually online is just not where I go. Yeah.
It used to be half as many characters, which was nice that you could have direct messages, which is most of our interactive in the direct messaging, which you can have seemingly unlimited. But even then, it's hard, and it's even harder to do it in a public thread when you got other people chiming in with their 2 cents and muddying the waters even further.
Oh yeah.
But I have these conversations all the time, and I find it fascinating and entertaining. I don't watch TV. I have deep, meaningful conversations online, and typically I try to label myself as Tom, your friendly neighborhood atheist, and I don't always succeed. I find myself apologizing a lot of time because I get frustrated and I let that out. And I know with you, there's been various times where it's like, not trying to be an asshole. I know it seems that way, but really, I'm best intentions.
No, yeah, and that's most interesting thing about, especially having conversations online, is that I think the tone of our conversations changed when we started talking about things that had nothing to do with deep philosophical things, but just about our lives and learning a little bit about you. And one of the things that makes online really, really hard is you don't see someone as a person most of the time, especially when the avatars that you look at and all these different things, it's not even a real person's face. It's like I don't know, some random drawing or whatever. It just makes it difficult to see someone as a person. But when you start to see someone as a person, even if you have deep disagreements, it really helps the discussion. So
it's funny to me. I have conversations that get kind of nasty. I try not to go there, but occasionally I do. But I've had conversations where people have been like really nasty to me.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, how's your garden? Because I've got some garden videos, and I'll be like, well, my garden's wonderful. Thank you for asking. And the whole tone of the conversation changes for this person that you've been like, I'll say, "Oh, hello, how are you? You seem like a perfectly nice person. 5 minutes ago you were an asshole, but now you're a decent human being."
Yeah, it's funny how just making that connection can help. And that just doesn't happen all that much online because I think people get too much, I don't know what word to use, but they get too much of a kick out of being a jerk sometimes.
I think that's definitely true. There are people who, we call them trolls,
Exactly.
and their whole purpose is to work people up. And some are very effective, and some, I try to. It's a fine line. I don't want to ignore them. I want to acknowledge them, but I want to acknowledge them as trolls. I want to say, I know who you are, I know what you are, and I know what you're trying to do, and I'm not falling for it.
Yeah.
But because any attention is good attention, and I tried to give them as little attention as possible while still acknowledging them.
Yeah. I normally try to just completely ignore them, but that's just because I
Well,
don't have the
yeah,
time on my hands to
yeah.
keep up with 15 different threads.
Well, I have a very bad habit of not wanting to let them think they won.
Yeah. Yeah. That's normally and that sometimes can be the hardest thing about having a discussion, is a fear of losing. And
Yeah,
sometimes, I mean, in any conversation, it doesn't matter
yeah,
who it's with. There's always something you can learn. And sometimes in
yeah,
order to actually learn something, you've got to admit that
yeah,
you might be ignorant on something, or you might be
yeah.
misunderstanding something, or whatever. And in that case, sometimes you have to, in a sense, lose because
Yeah.
you have to admit that you're
Well,
vulnerable.
in the case of trolls, it's more of a matter of
Well,
I
yeah,
want to lay down the towel, lay down the white flag, and say, yeah, I know what's going on, and I'm I'm just going to stand here and wait for you
yeah,
to give up trying to fuss with me. Where other conversations, because I when somebody gives up the conversation, I take that as a win. I know I shouldn't. I know there's probably people just like that. I'm done trying to convince you of something you're not going to be convinced of. Because I'm tenacious. My father will uh, agree with that assessment.
I'll agree with
Is
that assessment.
I I don't like to leave things go. I don't know if it's a matter of that I want to be understood. I want whatever it is that I'm trying to say understood, or if it's
Yeah,
just that I want the last word. I can't really say. Um,
yeah,
because I enjoy the battle, so to speak, but I also enjoy hearing other people trying to. Most people don't think the way I do,
hmm,
and I like trying to understand how other people came to the conclusions that they came to. Um, but unfortunately, when I disagree with, or if I think they've come to those conclusions wrong, I like to say so.
yeah, yeah. And one of the things that can just be an absolute conversation, especially for civil discourse, civil conversation, is to automatically assume that even if the person that you're talking to, because in the case for between the two of us, one of us is right, one of us is wrong.
Yeah,
But if you come into the conversation assuming that the person believes what they believe just because they're completely irrational, then you're just it's going to be really really hard to have a conversation with that person. It's going to be really really hard to try to understand
yeah,
where they're coming from. And sometimes when you're online, um, that can just be, it goes back to just looking at a face on a screen or an avatar on a
yeah,
screen and forgetting there's a person here who has what believes what they believe for good or bad reasons, but they have their reasons.
yeah.
Um,
My
because
best friend who's Catholic, he's very good at saying, "Well, that's what you believe, and this is what I believe," and
yeah,
and just basically leave it at that. Um, you know, not so much killing the discussion, but basically saying, enough has been said.
yeah,
And you can do that face to face. Where online, you don't have the stopping power. You don't have somebody that's basically saying, I don't want to say waving the white flag, but basically saying there's no point in beating a dead horse.
Hey, let's take a break and go do something else and be friends, and then we can pick this up later. You don't have that luxury as much on the internet.
But and also a lot of people get, you know, I don't want to say bitter is not the right word, but they get, you know, they're like, I'm through with you. Um, I find a lot of people that I not so much rehash the discussion, but reconnect the discussion. Like with you, there have been several times where, for whatever reason, the conversation stopped, and then we picked it up later.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was a matter of just other things, you know, more pressing came about, or just needed a break. But some people just they won't. You know, once they're fed up, they're fed up. Where I'm always willing to try again. And not so much that I want to convince the other person, because I know quite often I'm not going to convince anyone who believes something like God. Because, you know, I come at it on the question of God. I don't care. I don't care whether or not there is a God. I personally see no reason to think there is a God. And a lot of people have the attitude that, you know, atheists, oh, you don't think there's God, you're mad at God, you're dead set against believing in God, which is, for me at least, completely untrue. Especially, you know, the mad at God part, which I always found bizarre when somebody says you're mad at God. Like, I don't think there is a God. Why? How am I mad?
Well, I definitely would say it's definitely, at least the topic is definitely not something you don't care about. Just from our interactions, and this is something that you talk about rather frequently, tweet about rather frequently, and probably talk about on Facebook rather frequently too. We're not friends on Facebook. We should probably change that. But
Oh, you're on Facebook?
yeah, I am on Facebook. But it's definitely something that you're definitely passionate about. So I might push. I don't know if I would say that you're necessarily mad at God, but this is a topic you care
Well,
deeply
I had this
about.
conversation with somebody about. I said that I'm a atheist and an anti-theist,
Uh-huh.
and she said, "What's the difference?" And it's a huge difference. An anti-theist is somebody who is angry at religion, and not necessarily angry at religion, but has, you know, who is against religion. Where an atheist is just somebody who doesn't find any reason to think that there's a God. And I'm definitely an anti-theist, and that's where a lot of my talk about God. When I talk about God, I talk about God as a character, much in the same way I would talk about Harry Potter. To me, God is not a real thing. God is just a character that's in a book. You know, be it Jehovah or Thor. You know, these are gods. These are just characters with names. It does not mean that they're real things. My, I guess, desire to talk about it a lot is just the fact that there's this constant push from religion, and in this country, mostly Christianity, that, you know, you got to believe in God. God is real. God is true. You got to believe in God. You're fighting against God if you don't believe in God. And like, I don't. I'm just sick and tired of people being told, or sick and tired of being told that God is real. I mean, I drive down a highway and there's 3 or 4 billboards that say God is real, proof of God. Like, just putting up a billboard is not proof. You can't just say God is real
Yeah.
without some pushback. It's like, if you're going to say God is real, you have to show God is real. Otherwise, I say shut the hell up. You know, no offense, but I mean, I understand
No.
that people have a feeling that God is real, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. Like I mentioned, my best friend, deeply religious, deeply devoted. He never talks about God because God is his personal thing. Whereas religion, and I'd say probably only 10% of the people, are pushing this idea that you got to believe in God. God is definitely real, and you got to believe in God. And that makes me angry because I don't have to believe that there's God. God is only real to them. It's not real to me. I don't need to be told that God is real, because you might as well be telling me Harry Potter is real. I mean, it is a meaningless thing. And I get
It's
into these
meaningless
conversations.
unless he exists. But
Well, thing is, if God exists, let it show itself. I mean, I constantly hear God wants a relationship with you. Like, well, how big of a failure is this God that he can't manage a simple relationship with someone who's like right here? It's like, well, you have to be open to God. Like, I know lots of people who are deeply religious who deeply, deeply wanted a relationship with God. And they basically came to the conclusion that there was nothing there to have a relationship with. And now they're atheists. So if those people can't manage to have a conversation with God, what chance do I, someone who doesn't really care?
well, there's also just a counterpoint. I mean, there's plenty of atheists who come to a different conclusion after having a similar journey. But um, I mean, even even when you look at if God exists, then that existence is especially if God exists as a Christian God, as Christian understanding of God. I mean, it's a fairly, if not ultimately consequential thing. And if he doesn't exist, then it's of no consequence. But I think it's one of the reasons why people care so much about trying to talk about God and try to discuss proving God is because they believe that it is, and I believe because I am one of these Christians, but it's an ultimately important thing, and to think that ignoring him is to our peril. And sometimes when I try to talk about, and sometimes when in our conversations, some of the um, I just lost my train of thought. That's good. Way to go. But I'll let you jump in. This is why I
Uh,
like writing. I can think and
yeah,
produce something and
and
then
take your
revise
time
and
and
edit.
get back to it. Um, Here's how I look at this that particular argument. What if there is a God? Like, what if there is a God and it is a completely different God than the one that you think it is? And this is a truly vengeful, petty, God that will forgive someone for not believing, but will condemn those who believe in the wrong God. I mean, the whole thing, God says, "Thou shalt have no other God before me." Well, what if the God that you believe in is a different God than that one? And you got it wrong and it's pissing that God off. Where I, on the other hand, don't have any God, period. Therefore, I have no God before whatever God there is, and I get a pass. I mean, what if Allah is the one true God?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting. I've actually never heard it phrased quite. I've heard a similar question, but not phrased quite like that. You're right that no one thinks like you, Tom. But I think that if let's use a concept and talk about it in terms of gods that are prevalent in terms of Christian God, Islam, Muslim God of Allah. Just say Allah. If Allah is real and Yahweh, Jesus, is not God, then that has serious consequences because it's different concepts of who God is. Um, so, I mean, I don't know a ton about Islam, so I don't really want to pontificate too much on it. But I mean, there are different concepts of who this God is. There's a different way of trying to appease that God. There's a different way of trying to. So my initial conversation, my initial point in making, I don't know if I would say it was an argument, but just kind of a description of the importance of the concept of God is that it has massive ramifications. If God doesn't exist, there's large ramifications for that. If the Christian God exists, there's ramifications there. Allah, different, and even go into a different worldview like Hinduism or Buddhism, if that's true.
Or
There's
the ancient gods. I mean, for all you know, Odin could be, or Zeus, or, you know, and the Greek gods, or Egyptian gods, or Roman gods. I mean, I love the fact that the Romans used to call Christians atheists
yeah,
because they didn't believe in the right gods. So it's,
yeah. It is ironic, but I think you have a different especially with polytheism, you have different concepts. We've kind of veered off of our original topic, but it's fun. Um,
Well, that's the whole idea of a conversation.
yeah,
It's not a debate.
exactly.
We're not trying to prove one thing or other. We're just trying to, express the ideas that we have.
Yeah, because if you look at polytheism, say, versus monotheism, and you got it's radically different concepts, and there's a reason. Even let's assume that none of it's true. There's a reason why monotheism is a better system than polytheism.
And I agree, but
It makes more sense.
do you know how we came to have polytheism? Because
Well, how did we come to have polytheism?
things were attributed to gods. Different things were attributed to different gods. And basically, as time went along, gods were consolidated. And eventually they were consolidated into just one god.
Uh,
I mean, if you think of like ancient people, they had the
yeah,
god of the wind, the god of the rain, god of the thunder, god of the earth, god of fire, god of water. There was gods for everything.
yeah.
And eventually gods were giving multiple things to be in charge of. And they just, my opinion is just they got consolidated. They got too cumbersome to have all these different gods. So they decided just one god to rule them all.
Kind of like a nice ring.
The Bible says, the Bible fully acknowledges that there are other gods. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. So the God of the Bible is acknowledging that there are other gods. So
That depends somewhat on your interpretation of that.
Well,
In terms of, but I'm trying to kind of think through your description of gods being consolidated. I mean, I'm not. This is one of the reasons why I'm better at writing, is because I'm not so hot at thinking on my feet necessarily. But um, in terms of, I don't really know where to go with that, but I would have to think about it a lot more. That's just me. But um,
now I wish I could be like David Smalley or Matt Dillahunty, who are extremely knowledgeable about the Bible and extremely knowledgeable about just the arguments.
yeah,
Yeah, I wing it quite a bit because I don't know the language. I don't know the terminology. I mean, I know it, but I have a hard time bringing it up when I'm speaking.
yeah,
So I spend a little bit more time basically trying to express the idea rather than just using the word that is the idea.
yeah.
Uh,
Almost kind of like you said, this is just a conversation more than a debate, so it's not something I necessarily was like, I
yeah.
got to study up for this. So, but um, when it comes to, I don't even know where to go, honestly. But there's there's definitely a rational case to be made for the existence of God, and you can look through several different arguments. You can say you can make an evaluation of whether or not the rational case is a good one or not. But there's definitely a reasonable case to be made. In which case, most people probably have heard, especially your audience, have probably heard and learned how to refute or try to refute all the different arguments that can be brought up. But it looks like you're starting to research or look up something.
Now I'm responding to somebody.
Okay.
I'm listening, and Beach Price wants to know who you are, and you
Okay.
are someone I've been having conversation with for quite a while on Twitter. And Practical Magic 9, Connie. Hello, Connie. The ramifications of the concept of God not existing does have far-reaching implications is true, but mostly because the lack of belief in deities informs so many of how life affects an afterlife. Informs so many people, I guess, on how life affects the afterlife. Um, which that's one of the things about religion that I find deeply troubling is they are telling you basically made up rules on how to live this life to affect your afterlife. And they are completely made up. I mean, they're every branch of Christianity, which are thousands of them, has a different view of the afterlife and different views of how to attain it, and different requirements, different prayers, different practices.
Different branches of Christianity do?
Well, there's, I mean, each and every church is a different branch. I mean, no two people practice Christianity the same way, but each church has a variation, which is why people find a church that they're comfortable with. I mean, you can have two churches right next to each other, and why does one person go to one church and one go to the other? Because the message one church is more appealing to them than the other church. But you look at Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Christians and Catholics, which aren't Christian, but it's the same basic God. And I mean, especially Catholicism. I mean, you look at the ridiculousness of the procedural way that they practice religion. And there's so much ornamentation and so much just pomp and circumstance to this religion. It's all made up. They just, I mean, people joke about the Pope's funny hat. They've made up these costumes. It's all man created. I mean, it's their way of trying to convince the people that God is real by saying God has ordained these things. God has handed down these things that we should do. And it's completely made up. And I find that so aggravating that they act as if God has told them. I mean, I come from, partially a Jewish background. And, like one of the things in Judaism is you have to have different set of dishes for different meals. I mean, from the holy holiday meals, you can't use the same dishes as you use for every day. And they act as if God told them that. I mean, it's so ridiculous. But yet people believe it because the religion tells them to believe it. And I don't know how you can't combat that. I mean, I understand people holding on to the tradition of religion, but they do things on the basis of that religion being true and factual, and it simply is not. I mean, I can understand believing, the concept of God being real, but you go to any church and you're told a different story. And the story you're told is going to conflict with another church. And that church is going to tell you the other church has got it wrong. And that's how I became an atheist. It was basically going to a lot of different churches, including synagogues, and constantly hearing how the other ones have it wrong. And I just figure, y'all have it wrong. Y'all just making this shit up.
Well, there's definitely there's central themes, and there's a central belief system that's common to all. I mean, there's a reason why there's such a thing called orthodoxy and central tenets of the Christian faith.
Yes, because one religion created. I mean, they say this about atheism, that we're becoming fractured, we're becoming different divisions of atheists, and it's kind of true. But Christianity started out as a very small group, and the orthodoxy was born, and then they diverged and diverged again and diverged again and diverged again. But the basic tenets, the orthodoxy, was the core of Christianity. That remained the same. They don't all have the same core because it's true. They all have the same core because the evolution of Christianity, that's what they started with. And you don't lose things like that. I mean, I have this conversation with about evolution. People who don't believe evolution is true. They think God created everything. And he's like, oh, how do you explain this? How do you explain this? It's like, it's very easy to explain. Like, oh, that's because God did it, which is always the answer. It's always the answer. It's like, I don't understand how it could possibly be, therefore God is the answer. And the explanation of why all these religions believe basically the same thing is not because, you know, I don't find any reason to believe it's because God is true. I find it much easier to explain it by saying all started from the same basic core principle. I mean, Christianity is based on Judaism. Islam is based on Judaism. So it's no surprise that the gods they believe in are very similar.
There's definitely Christianity grows and is the. I mean, if you from a Christian perspective, Christianity is the fulfillment of promises that are. It's the fulfillment of promises that are made in Old Testament and Jewish scripture. I don't know that I would say that Islam grows out of Judaism. It definitely is historically tied to it in its scripture and the region that it's in. But it's, I don't know. I'm not an expert on Islam. I'm not going to pretend to be one. But
I mean, Christianity is based on Jesus being God, correct?
yes,
And Christianity is based on Judaism. I mean, it was born out of Judaism. It was born from a bunch of Jews who decided something different. Correct?
I mean, it kind of depends on what you mean by decided something different. I mean,
they decided that
they believe that Jesus was the fulfillment
was the fulfillment of something
of Old Testament prophecy.
Yeah.
He was the Messiah.
Yeah.
That's
and you talk to Jews who believed in the Old Testament. Like, sure, Jesus, I guess he was real, but he definitely wasn't God.
Yeah, that's true. Otherwise, they'd be Christians.
Yeah.
But
I just, being so convinced of something, when other people are equally convinced, equally as convinced that what they believe is true. And it's just this stubbornness to me that what I believe is true and what they believe is wrong. And that's true of me, except in that I don't believe in anything. I mean, as far as religion goes, I don't accept any of it. I don't see any of it as true. I can't say this is what I believe about religion because I don't believe anything.
other than it's not true.
What makes, I mean, that's what makes me an atheist is the fact that I don't believe it. Yeah. And I keep getting, well, that is a belief. I'm like, how is not believing something a belief?
Well, it's definitely, it kind of depends on how you define belief, but it's definitely
it's a form of belief, but it's like, it's like the old joke. Atheism is a religion like bald is a hair color. Or atheism is religion like laying down is a sport. Atheism is a religion like doing a non-thing is a thing.
I mean, to a certain extent, I would agree with you in a broad sense of what atheism is, but you do, because you could say almost the same thing about theism, because theism in and of itself has no necessarily particular doctrine other than a belief in a being. That's why there's different branches of theism.
It has definite doctrine and dogma. It's not only a belief that that there is a God.
Well, I'm just talking about the bare
specific God.
And yeah, but I'm talking about the bare minimum proposition of theism.
Yeah, but still, if you believe that there is a God, you have to have some idea of what God there is.
Exactly. I mean, I don't disagree with that.
If you believe that there is a God, you believe there's a God for a reason. That God either created you or created the universe. God did something. I mean, all this baggage comes with believing that there's a God, because you need a reason to believe there's a God. Be it, you needed a God to create things. You need a God for life to have purpose. I mean, you can't just think, sure, there's a God. And there's people who are like that. And they're, I call them atheists because, like, oh, yeah, there's God. And they don't give it any more thought than that. They show up at
Yeah.
church because they're supposed to show up at church. Not because they believe something particular, but because it's part
Yeah.
of cultures. You go to church, which
Yeah.
is, I don't know if you've heard the story. I've told it many times. Is I did not realize that my family believed in God until I was like 17, because like Santa Claus, when I got over Santa Claus, we still had Christmas and I still had presents that said from Santa, and I had to go to church, and we talked about God and we talked about Santa Claus, and I lost my belief in the God when I lost it in the Santa Claus. But because we kept talking about it, I just assumed they were on the same page I was, and God is a character and Santa Claus is a character. And I came home from work one day after talking to a young Earth creationist, and I said to my stepmother, "God, this nutcase thinks God is real." And my stepmother was like, "Of course God is real." I was like, "What? Is Santa Claus real too?" I mean, it's like, what do you mean God? It blew me away. And I never really considered myself an atheist because I didn't really know what an atheist was. To me, an atheist was Richard Dawkins, who I thought was an arrogant asshole, until years later, after having many of the conversations he's had, and I came to understand why he came off that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, I wasn't an atheist. I just didn't think there was a God.
Yeah. Well, coming back to kind of one of the things, like as a theist, you do think about who God is, and who God is motivates the way that you think about the world. If you think that God created the world, then you're most likely going to believe that he has a set of, I'll just call it a set of rules to live by.
Yes.
And so those rules are going to motivate you to live a certain way. And so for an atheist, there still are those questions of how do I live my life? Why do I live my life the way I do? That still have to answer those questions. Let's see if I can make this point clearly in verbal communication, but it's something that a theist and atheist both share, is that need to answer those questions of why is life important? Why is life here? What is the meaning of my own life?
And I disagree with that.
Okay.
Um, and I'll let you finish, but just quickly, to me, life in the greater scheme, in the universal scheme, is meaningless. Life is just a happy accident for us, and we make our own particular meaning for our own particular lives. But in the greater scheme of things, it's really meaningless.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I would expect, but you still are answering that own question for yourself, and that's mostly because a lot of atheists hate,
No,
at least in some of the.
I'm answering that question for the guy on the other side of the planet who doesn't know I exist. What does my meaning have in his life? Zero. My life is meaningless to 99% of the people on this planet. They have no knowledge of my existence. I am utterly meaningless to them. But for those who do know about me, I have meaning. And their existence gives me meaning. But beyond this planet, I mean, nowhere else in the universe cares about anyone on this little tiny speck of a dust planet. They don't even know we are here.
Yeah.
We are utterly meaningless. And people believe that the God of the Bible created the universe just for us, which just is astounding.
And the whole point of me bringing up the distinction is that still is an answer to the question, and you have to figure out how to live in that reality. That's one of the things that I meant what I was getting to when I said that the belief, if God exists, has great ramifications. If God doesn't exist, there's ramifications that are extremely important. It's why the discussion is so important and why it's so valuable. because if God doesn't exist, then we're going to have to figure out how to cope with that because there's a reason why religion is so prevalent, is because it drives that sense of meaning. It drives that sense of meaning for a lot of people. You pull that away, then you're going to have to find out another way to answer that question, or else you might be concerned about anarchy.
Well, I think God is, or religion is so prevalent because it's tradition. People have, you know, we believe what our parents believe. And that tradition of belief is carried down. Most people believe that there's a God, not because they think that there's a God, but because their parents have told them that there's a God. If we had a generation of people who are no longer telling their children that there's a God, and that most questions, or that all questions pretty much, have a reasonable, rational, naturalistic explanation, even the questions that don't have answers yet have a reasonable, rational, and natural explanation. If we taught that to all the children and never mentioned God, religion would die. It would disappear. And no one would miss it. Because the questions, God has always been used to answer the questions that we could not possibly have answers for, that we currently do have answers for, which people reject because it conflicts with their notion that God is real. People reject evolution not because they have a reason to reject evolution, but because it conflicts with the idea that God created the heavens and the earth and created all the animals and put everything on earth as it was or as it is now.
I was just trying to think of where to go from there. But there's definitely a lot of crazy things that religious people believe. I'm not going to disagree with that. But
Well, let me ask you this.
okay,
If God were to be definitively shown not to exist tomorrow, just just became completely clear to everyone on the planet, how would your personal life change?
ask that question one more time. Did you say, how would my life change?
Yeah, if it were definitively shown that there was no God, how would your life change?
I'd have to get a new job because my job is tied into Christianity and Christian faith.
Yeah. So for those with a job like yours, believing in there's a strong motivator to
Oh, there is.
continue believing. And there's the Clergy Project, which is basically an organization that was created by four um, preachers who lost their faith. I mean, I remember, when I was like 30 years ago now, I think three, I definitely knew two, I think I knew three preachers who had lost their faith. They were atheists. They no longer believed in God. And two of them were preaching even though they didn't believe. And they were like, this is my job. If I tell people I don't believe in God, I lose my job. But
Yeah.
they were telling stories. I mean, they had changed the way they preached to telling the morality tales of
Yeah.
religion rather than preaching that God was real.
Yeah.
But this was in South. This is North Carolina, and I'm sure their bosses were eventually going, "You're not mentioning God enough."
Yeah.
And I lost touch with them when I moved, but I imagine that it's a very difficult job transition to go from preaching God is real to what do you know? What do you do next? And the Clergy Project was basically created to help those people to transition out of preaching.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Connie, Practical Magic 9, says something that is true of so many atheists. Study the Bible for years and just finally came to the conclusion this is not real. This is made up. I mean, there's not too many atheists who read the Bible and are convinced. I use Kirk Cameron as an example of someone who thinks he was an atheist. And I hate to use the no true Scotsman argument, but
Well, then don't use
he's
it.
he's someone who thought he was an atheist because he never gave God a thought. He was raised without religion. He was raised, kind of like I was. My parents, they never tried to convince me that God was real. They just assumed I believed as they believed. They were shocked when I was like, I no, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't believe any of that nonsense. They're like, what do you mean you don't believe that nonsense? Um, I think he's just someone who never really gave God that much of a thought. And then when somebody told him, it's like, oh, wow, that sounds pretty good. Whereas in my case, I got very interested in religion, and that was based on the fact that, finding out that my family actually believed. I tried for literally decades to understand why do they think God is real? And I studied religion. I studied all the religions, and I read the Bible and studied basically the evolution of gods. And at some point in my 40s, I just like I can't try anymore. There's just nothing there for me to grasp onto. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got as far as pantheism, which is the universe is God, and this notion that the deeds that you do accumulate, and the good deeds mean goodness will come back to you, and bad deeds mean bad will come back to you. And then I started looking at it's the question of evil. People who do good constantly still have bad things happen to them. I'm like, how is this possible?
Yeah.
And I just came to the conclusion that it's because that's how life works. Nothing is tied to anything. Things just happen. It's kind of the
Yeah.
I forget with the whole thing with the butterfly, butterfly being
Butterfly
you
effect.
know butterfly effect. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, there is an issue with, or a problem if you with the you said not you wanting to use the no true Scotsman approach, because I mean there's there some of the most prominent, I guess, apologists are people who at least claim that they went into it trying to prove it wrong and wound up digging through evidence and digging through everything, and they came to a different conclusion. It's one of the things that there was some point a couple of weeks ago, we were having a conversation, and or maybe not having a conversation on Twitter, but I mentioned something that one of the things that drives me crazy or makes me think a lot is trying to understand why people think the way that they do, how they come to different conclusions, and why they come to different conclusions. Because there are people, I mean, who have been convinced to believing that Christianity, in particular, and my background was true, and that's why they believe it. Not because there's like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, I think I'm going to go with that one, but they actually put it to the test, and in my experience, I put it to the test too. It's not like I just magically just decided that this was just how I was raised, and I've never questioned it. Um, and so it's not. That's just an interesting thing to think about how people come to the conclusions that they do and why. And it's one of the reasons why I think it is so hard to argue with someone and try to convince someone, because there are a lot of factors that go into believing something. There's a lot of factors into developing the way that you think about the world that go from emotional to your own personal life to just what you've been exposed to. It's just there's so much that goes into it that it's crazy to think about, but it's interesting to me and something I'd like to look into more.
well, back to original discussion. How would you? What ways would you try to find to enable people to have better, more productive conversations online? Because obviously, people have very emotional ties to their belief,
Yeah.
which comes out as soon as you tell them they're wrong. Um, somebody, it's QUARO.com, Curo,
Quora, I don't know.
Quora. They gave me a very good I don't want to say solution, but an example of how to have productive conversation is you believe in A, B, C, and D, and I believe in C, D, E, and F. So let's have a conversation about C and D and forget about A, B, E, and F, which is easy enough to say, but in practice, it's far more difficult. One
of the things, just from my own training as a writer and doing in philosopher, is the best way to have a conversation is to, especially with someone you disagree with, is to learn how to put their argument in a way that they can go, yeah, that's the way that I see it. So that it helps you understand what they're thinking, and that's going to be key to helping to convince someone that they're right or that they're wrong or whatever. It also helps you to be intellectually honest, helps you to be informed and educated too.
Yeah, that's definitely a life skill.
Yes,
is the ability to reword somebody's argument in a way that shows that you understand what their argument actually is. Because I think that's a lot of times that's the problem, is people don't really understand. They're so busy reacting that they're not trying to understand where the other person's coming from. The problem that I have quite often is the fact that I've heard the same thing so many times that I understand the argument and I've responded to the argument so many times that I bypass letting the current person I'm conversing with know that I understand the argument. Which is one of the reasons why I started doing the videos, my YouTube channel, was because I was having the same conversation over and over again. I wanted basically resource to go, here, watch this video. Unfortunately, people like to argue. They don't want to know that you know the argument. They just want to argue. So when I say go watch the video, they're like, I don't want to watch your video. You tell me right now why I'm wrong.
That sounds like one time when I tried to show you a video that wasn't me, but it was.
Well, that's showing a video of somebody else's.
Yeah, it's different. I understand.
Because I've had people argue with me about what I say in the video. Like, well, this is what you meant. Like, it's my video. I know what I meant.
Yeah.
Don't try to translate what I'm saying. It's people like to take shortcuts, and I understand that because it can be very time consuming trying to write down a lengthy, well thought out response that you kind of know is probably going to get skipped, and even if it doesn't get skipped, it's going to be and I fall into this. I get halfway through somebody's well thought out response, and you're already coming up with a rebuttal. That it's difficult to let somebody's thought fully flow before you're cutting it off.
Yeah. Sometimes just for me personally, I tend to be on the other side of the spectrum. Usually I'm more of a listener than a talker. So sometimes I'll hear someone talk and I'll be like, that sounds good. And oh, this is normally actually even when I'm reading. So and then I'll come back and think about it a couple days later. I'm like, that didn't make sense. That seemed illogical. And so sometimes that's why online interaction can be good and bad, because you can wait it out and think about it some. But
yeah, are you familiar with the podcast, the Dogma Debate?
I am not.
Okay. David
There's so
Smalley,
many podcasts out there now.
Yeah, David Smalley's. I think it's been 6 years he's had that podcast. But he was, I think Baptist, but he was raised very religious, fully on board with the religion, just, 100%. And then uh, when he was baptized later in, when he was late teens, he was baptized. They put him down. He came back, and the priest was like, "You got to believe this." And he's like, "I don't know if I do." And the priest's like, "You gotta." So he started diving into it and came out an atheist. But he has conversations with theists all the time. And I listen to the show, and they're like 3 hours long. But I'm just chomping at the bit, wanting to talk to these people. Because, like, how can you say these things? I mean, how, they just seem like blatantly ridiculous arguments for the existence of God. And I'm just, I need to, I don't know if it's a need to say that you're wrong or just a need to understand how they think that they are correct. Because
Yeah,
I understand, I just,
I've done the same thing, but from the other side. So that's what makes this fun.
and, I think I mentioned tonight, I don't watch TV. I just have conversations with people online because that's far more entertaining and interesting to me. And talk about religion and politics and environment and whatnot. I'm a talker, obviously.
Yeah.
A friend of mine he said, I never stop thinking. Yeah, I'm up till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning because not because I'm not tired, but because my brain is just constantly, I'm constantly re-engaging people on ideas that have been just so hashed out. I want to read some of these comments, but I
All
have to
right.
stop and read because, which is very rude. I've been
No,
trying to
it's
keep up
fine.
with them. Because Practical Magic 9 has been seen quite a bit, and we also have Gordon Livingstone. I am Scott, and I gotta say God. No chance, no way. I'm guessing Gordon is an atheist.
That sounds like it.
Connie says, let's see. Are we convincing people? My goal is not to convince people. Are let's see. People are convinced on their own. Yes, this is true. Conversion to religion is somewhat it's a personal experience. I am wanting to discuss. It's up to the person to decide. And Connie, I need you as a co-host. And Connie and we were part of Packard Pokesat, um, another podcast. But he wanted to talk about current events, and I'd rather just have conversations like this. But I need somebody to read these comments to me because I'm terrible at reading. Um, I have to listen to audiobooks. So I'm dyslexic, and I have to like read something 3 times before I can actually know what it said, which is
Yeah.
hilarious because my daughter picks up on this. When she was little, she'd read along with me, and she'd be like, "That's not what it says." The same thing. It's the same basic idea.
Yeah. But we'll have
Uh,
to, I'm going to have to start. Well, you got other more comments?
that's it. Main Gun '07. I personally don't care what people believe. I care about why you believe and how you argue the point. And I can't even say that I go that far. Um, it's not that I care what people believe. I only care when people are trying to convince me of what they believe. And when they do, I want them to work at it. I can't just have somebody say, this is true. I have to,
Yeah, and I
I
respect that.
need to back it up. And I've put forth a challenge so many times, convince me that God is real. And I've never gotten from anyone anything more when you boil it down than I feel it is true. Because the there is no evidence of a God. There's no proof of a God. And Holy Scripture is, you can read, most of it can be found in other older religions. I mean, it's just the retelling of older stories. I mean, even the story of Jesus, very similar stories can be found in several different places. I mean, all the details, being born of a virgin, being born on the 25th of December. I mean, just so many things about Jesus seem very clearly to have been adopted from earlier religions.
No, I mean, I would push back on that. I don't think that the parallels are nearly what some people claim they are, but that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah. But they're there. I mean, even if they're weak parallels, they're still parallels. I mean, we look at Christmas. I mean, people are so gung-ho, Christmas is about Christ. And everyone knows that Christmas is a pagan holiday. I mean, the Bible basically states that you should not have a live tree in your house. And Christmas is all about having a live tree in your house. Oh, I mean, it's dead now because you kill it, but it was a live tree.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things in Christianity that are conflict with basically Christmas. And people just, all these stories have been adopted. I mean, the whole thing with the Old Testament and the New Testament. The New Testament was a rewrite to make God more palatable. And they added Jesus to give a character that people could relate to.
Clearly, I would disagree with that characterization as well, but I would love to come back and talk more about some of these more specific issues, but
I'm not sure. What time zone are you in?
I'm in the Eastern time zone, so I'm starting to get really tired.
Yeah, it's getting late for you.
Yeah, I'm going to get up somewhat early tomorrow too. So, but
I appreciate you taking the time. I wish we didn't have the technical difficulties that we had earlier.
Yeah.
But I'm still getting the hang of trying to have I don't necessarily want to call it a show. I do have to thank Practical Magic 9 for giving me the name Tea with Tom. I like that. I started going conversations with Tom, the friendly neighborhood atheist, but that seemed a bit long.
Yeah, it's a little long, but I mean, I'd love to come back and talk some more, but
you want to
open up a specific can of worms.
I mean,
Say that again.
I said I'm sure you need to get to bed. I personally have to wake up at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Which I have no problem with, but it's the longer I stay up, the earlier it comes.
Exactly. Yeah, I've got to get up pretty early. Not that early, but anyway.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you very much, Brandon. We'll have to do it again, and hopefully have some more interesting discussions, and we'll get this all figured out.
Yeah, we got the technical side figured out now, finally. Or the ethical side, depending on.
Ethical.
I don't know if anyone will get that joke. I don't know if that was in the other time we tried to do this where we made the ethical.
I put on everywhere I was posting that we're trying to figure this out. Instead of putting technical difficulties, I put we are in ethical difficulties, and then I went back and like, oh shit, and that was funny. Okay. Anyways, I'm Tom, your friendly neighborhood atheist. And this has been Tea with Tom. And we will do this again real soon. Thanks for watching. And we'll catch you later.
Look forward to it.
Bye.
Bye.